Indeed, this intriguing title, and I would say we're facing one of the most important questions that we can ever imagine. I'm not sure if yes, please, Samyak, if you could join. Thank you very much. I don't think the forum and the Rhodes community had ever sort of thought that they would have to think about what it means to be human in this world, but this is exactly what we're going to debate. And just to pick a bit on the last session and the word hegemony, I think one of the key thinkers in this space, Antonio Gramsci, I think that we all know from the 30s, I think he labeled this word hegemony because he sort of found out that in his political space it was necessary to have some form of cultural power before you could have some political influence. So it was fundamental that this cultural hegemony was somehow formed before some political influence was possible. And I think that if he was here today, he would not say that this was a cultural hegemony that was needed, but a technical one. So today, if you don't have some kind of technical agency, it's increasingly becoming quite impossible to have some form of political leadership or political guidance. So what we're discussing today is basically who or what is going to be the main actor in this space. And in one of the panels, we were hearing about the last man, and I think is true. Somehow, all of us in this room, we are the last human standing that still has some form of, let's say, more control over the devices than the devices have over us. But we are nearing the moment when we are no longer being supported by devices, but the devices are actually growing up and standing somehow next to us, shoulder to shoulder already. So we need to form some kind of relationship with these systems that we're building. And this can no longer be a kind of master-slave Heideggerian relationship that we still think in terms of technology as we do sometimes in terms of mechanical technology. But now we have to face the fact that we are surrounded by all kinds of connectivities and we don't know always where they are or how they are there. So I think what we're going to discuss now is going to be very important for all of us to frame a new kind of story, a new kind of discourse in between the transhumanist hype of, okay, let's dance with the robots, and the other type of scare that's only thinking about privacy or security, that only sees the troubles, do not see the opportunity. So what we need to find is some kind of a middle, an in-between the scare and the hype, and in this in-between is where we are going to live. So we have a fantastic panel, and the order is, and the thing is that we're going to have 6-7 minute presentations each. Sophie is going to start, Sophie Hackford. Then we'll have Chateau Jill. Then we'll have Vladimir Yakunin. After that we have Samia Nkrumah. And then we have Kyra. And after that we'll have Fabio, sort of rounding it up. After that we'll have some preparation of questions, but I think by then we open up to the room immediately, because by then the tension, I would say, has become pretty unbearable to think about what it means to be human in this space, in this digital connectivity. So Sophie, if you want to kick off.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start as a futurist, which is my day job, to go a little further into the future and have a kind of imaginative exercise about what's coming. And I'm going to talk mostly about the concept of having aliens in our life with us every day, which is what I think is going to happen with artificial intelligence. I'm going to explain what I mean by that, what I mean by aliens. But we're essentially going to be surrounded by decision-making intelligences. Lots of different intelligent beings, a bit like you've just heard from Rob just now, that'll be camouflaged in our houses, in our clothes, in our offices, in our transport, maybe even in our bodies and eventually our minds. And so it's difficult, I think, to say that we're connected today. I think we were connected in the 90s. Now, as they say at MIT with Danny Hillis, we're entangled. We're entangled with the machines. We can't opt out of that entanglement. It's non-negotiable, and we can't separate ourselves from technology anymore. And that's a pretty profound place to find ourselves in. And we're in constant dialogue with that connectivity, with the AI, sending out and receiving signals, whether we know we're doing that or not. And I think AI is going to become our browser. It'll become our way that we interact with the internet, we interact with each other. It'll be that layer, the prism through which we see the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that's important. I love what Orimus talks about when he says this is going to be a terrifyingly convenient future. And I think that's the philosophical question that we've really seen in the last couple of days. The convenience versus the privacy, the convenience versus the security. And this is a big sort of philosophical debate that we're going to have over the next few years. But one of the biggest questions, I think, before I dive into those uses for AI, is that actually we don't know how to measure intelligence at all. Human intelligence or artificial intelligence. And if we can't measure it, it's actually quite difficult to measure the progress of AI. We don't have a very good way to understand how far AI is along the intelligence spectrum, and therefore measurement of it is quite a challenge. But I want to talk, as I said before, about 7 things that I think we need to prepare for, that I really think are coming in the next few years. And you'll think some of them are crazy, but I don't mind, because I think they probably are going to be quite crazy. And the first one is what people call the algorithmic gaze. And this is the concept that how computers see the world is going to be the dominant reality. How computers view us and our behaviors and categorizing us and understanding us is actually going to be the real truth. And that's a massive challenge to what we understand as sort of being human today. Because of course, our faces are no longer just our faces. Now that we have facial recognition technology, your face is your wallet in China. It can be your password when you're logging into certain platforms. It can be your passport, perhaps, in the future. It may end up even being your alibi if, of course, you're captured on cameras every moment of your life, which all of us inevitably are. The second thing I think that we need to prepare ourselves for is this idea of collaborative intelligence. And this is basically the idea that, as we've heard time and time again today and yesterday, it isn't us or the machines, it's us and the machines. And I think we don't have much of a grasp of what that really looks like. And I think we're going to have to learn to use the machines, but they're going to have to learn how to use us as well. And that's going to be a mutual learning relationship. We'll train them and they'll train us. One of the most profound and interesting examples of this, I think, is the concept of a digital double. The idea that we may have an ambassador, like an agent out there roaming the internet on our behalf, a digital version of us, a model of us, of all our behaviors and our desires. And it'll be applying for jobs on our behalf and coming back with 5 or 6 options it thinks would probably work for us. It might watch all the movies on Netflix for us and tell us what we should be watching at that very moment. It might read all the books on Amazon for us and let us know what we should be reading. If we get diagnosed with a disease, it might look at all the possible treatments for us and recommend, based on our genetics and our behavior, what the best outcome for us will be. Essentially, that AIs, these aliens, will be living multiple versions of our lives so that we can live the best possible human life. And I think that's a really interesting concept. The third thing I think we need to prepare for is a very long word, which is I can never say it either, anthropomorphization, i.e. that we think that robots are quite cuddly and nice sometimes because they have nice smiley faces, and other times we're horrified by them because they look like the Terminator. And it doesn't seem that we actually need to have much sentience or much of an intelligence inside a robot before we start putting human or kind of animal tendencies on them. And that's a very strange thing for us to have in our lives, which we don't have today, apart from pets, of course. The fourth thing I think we need to think about is the moral status of the machines. If we think rats can suffer, which we do, which is why we have rules on how you can do medical research on them, Why couldn't digital minds suffer? And should we have rules about that before we unwittingly commit moral atrocities against them? I think the next thing we need to think about is if we start backing up parts of our mind onto a machine, which arguably I already have using my phone, then does that phone start to have rights? Is that actually me? Does my digital double or my agent actually represent a kind of immortality for me? Will it live on beyond my own death? And finally, I think we need to think about the fact that we might be actually mandated to use artificial intelligence. We might be mandated to have a robot on our board. An investor might demand that. Insurers might demand that a doctor refers to an artificial intelligent being before it diagnoses me with something. Maybe lawyers will have to refer to one to be covered by malpractice insurance. I think the mandating of AI is going to be almost inevitable. So from a kind of concluding perspective, I want to think about, and I'm fascinated about this panel as well, how we evolve our role when actually it isn't quite as simple as one might read in the media, that either our jobs will or won't go, that the robots will or won't take over the world, but actually there's going to be a very nuanced picture that evolves over the next few years that's really fascinating, but really stretches our concepts of what being human actually means. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's massively rich, and we'll go in there. But I think there's one very nice sort of move over to you, Chateau, is that you say basically on the level of intelligence, this is somehow already reduction of us as well, because it's not only intelligence is sort of only one of the things that we basically are, sort of a set of characteristics. If we take it to the level of consciousness, it may be that the aliens have already been here for quite a long time. And there's a lot of people believing in animism, believing that trees and a lot of things are alive already. So this notion that things are sort of alive has been around for a long time in our world. So maybe we find a way to bring that type of level of consciousness into this discourse. So Chateau, maybe over to you.
Thank you. I want to talk about consciousness in a slightly different way. I will contrast intelligence, which is like what AI can do. That's why it's called AI. It helps us to solve problems and help us to deal with issues that we may not be able to deal with. But consciousness is something else. Consciousness is self-awareness, and it takes a long time, for instance, for AI to become consciously self-aware. That's one thing. The other thing we talk about consciousness. Consciousness is about ourselves being able to express our emotions, our motivations, and above all, consciousness is about intention. AI can do lots of things, but I don't think AI can have intentionality as humans do. But that's another question. But I would say Sophie's 7 point is creative and provocative enough, but perhaps not provocative as much as it didn't go far enough. For instance, can we imagine that our future children, take one child in your mind, the child that you really find really precious, whether it's your own child, your grandchild, or the child that you really love. And imagine their children, his or her children, might be born with a chip instantly implanted into their brain. And then all that was knowledge and information will be at the click of probably eyelid. And this is not necessarily needing AI. And this chip, well, as Sophie envisioned, we don't even need a digital double. We already are a digital double. This thing will program us, pre-configure us so that we actually live the life that our physique, our tendency will allow us to live. That would be a further step of imagination. So all these, maybe we haven't gone too far enough. Technology is revolutionizing our society, our life, the way we vote, the kind of work we can do, and the way we go about our business and we run our household, including the kind of things we eat and how we sleep, and even the kind of husband we should choose. And not to mention the color of our baby's eyes to be determined. But yet, if you take a closer look, take that child in mind, our education hasn't responded to such digital revolution. You think about it, our education remained in the late 1800s. It's a factory model. It's still young people sit in rows in the classroom, same classroom, the same age, and waiting for knowledge to be imparted, skills to be passed on, and so on. And worst of all, they suffer the same kind of stress of exams, with only assessing their ability to pass exams. So what do we do in this state age? I think in the only way to counter the kind of the scenario that Sophie had laid out to us, and the kind of question that this panel aimed to answer, what is humanity in the future? And the only way to respond to that is education. It's simple. In this room, everybody is an expert in education. Why? Because we will be educated. We have children going through education, and this is something that we care most. So let's just have a quick look how currently, Rob would say, how currently technology has already been able to revolutionize education, even though schooling itself hasn't changed. For instance, tailored curriculum, personalized pedagogy. This is already possible. We don't have to suffer this kind of same. And education system currently is geared towards that average child who doesn't exist. The child you love, Peter, is not that average child. The child that you pressurize is not that average child. Your child is a unique person, it's a unique individual. So computer has already made it possible to have tailored and personalized education. Secondly, we tend to use exam to feedback the quality of learning. But in fact now, computer would allow us to actually trace our learning steps and give feedback as it happens, and provide that kind of the thing that we need so that we can progress to the next step. And so in this way, learning can already be dynamic. It can take place anywhere, anytime, and at any age. A 12-year-old can study astrophysics, why not? So some people had said currently factory model education is actually a situation where humans teach humans to be machines. And this has to change in order to live through the kind of the world that we just imagined. And that requires us to understand what education should be and how we teach to be human. Of course, what we left out, I forgot to mention, is current education always privileged the elite. But technology could make education accessible to all. And when education is accessible to all, now we're not talking about Khan Academy, MOOC, and Coursera, and what you name it. But also lots of new platform is being developed every day. So what it can do for education. And I think there are a few things I'll just quickly highlight. The first is education has to enable us to become more fully human. What does it mean? Knowledge, education shouldn't just be about knowledge, shouldn't just be about skills, but about holistic flourishing of ourselves as human beings. Secondly, instead of technology alienating us from ourselves, that Chinese situation that people are no longer cooking and no longer talking to each other because they always stayed connected through a device. Education must provide time and space for human relationship and profound, deep human encounter. Because now, then, with the human encounter, with the kind of human relationship, teachers are not authority anymore. Teachers are actually our learning partner. That means education will change. Teachers will be facilitators, will be dialogue partners, will be guiding and counseling, creating space for our young people to explore, to inquire, to set limits, and so on. Then learning will be based on dialogue, collaboration, and engagement. That's already happening. But then we can also think learning is not to worry about the jobs, but learning is to help us understand the meaningfulness of work. what is our relationship to work? For instance, is work just to pay bills for our livelihood? What about work as an expression of our talent? What about work as a way of serving our community? How about work as a way of advancing humanity and our conditions and so on? So if we say the future learning, it has to take place in community. And to summarize, what are the learnings? Learning to care, learning to love, learning to dialogue, learning to listen, learning to be creative, to be imaginative, learning to tell a story that humanity can live by. And Fred last night, you probably remember, so passionately talking about that yearning. Yearning is learning to be human together. So in a way that the vision of the future in this high-tech world has to be a spiritual one and has to be an ethical one. Why is it spiritual? Because it does not only answer questions who we are in this high-tech time or what we are in this kind of transhuman era, but more importantly is how we want to be, how we shall be. And it's an ethical one because it has to be rooted in human relationship. So I would say to resist and overcome the threat of technology, AI, let's learn to become fully human.
It's perfect, it's very clear, and I think, yes, absolutely. And I couldn't, of course, couldn't agree more. I think there's quite an alignment there already, so we'll figure that out. But I won't forget, I was in Moscow, I think 3 years ago, with Professor Arshinov about a conference on Internet of Things. And we were sitting in the morning with the room of all the faculty. And we were all basically engineers talking about Internet of Things and technical sense. And then one professor said, well, I think this is all very nice, but the children are no longer coming with me into the woods to pick strawberries. And everybody got very silent because we did not really immediately understood the profoundness of this remark. And but basically she says, well, they don't want to leave their devices, so that they're all the device all the time. And for the first time, the children do not want to go into the woods to look at the strawberries. And so this was a comment of a professor of engineering in a room full of engineers in a conference on Internet of Things. And we realized the importance of this remark. I think with this, we go to Vladimir Yakunin. If you want to take the stand, then please, the room is yours.
Firstly, Rob, I congratulate you because in front of this audience we can state that it's the most female panel out of every panels being, conducted before that. This is already a great advantage. Listen, with your last remark, I would like to say that sometimes when we are talking about younger generation, we are talking about selves and we are saying, listen, we are living in the real world while they are living in virtual world. Sometimes I have a feeling that possibly I'm wrong and I am living on some other planet. I will try to explain why. I would put my signature on everything which, Charter, you said. But where I should put the knowledge of the great movement, the name of which is free of child living, free of family living. Why? We have just recently published information of I forgot the name of the university in Great Britain, where they organized a special signing of the document on the part of thousands of the students to permit the management of the university to call upon the parents or some elder friends or something like that in case they feel there is something wrong with the kid. Because, in Great Britain, after 18 years old, they considered to be mature, but the number of suicides committed in this university, tripled through 5 years. I don't remember the name of the university, but you can find it easily, it was published in the newspapers. Why I'm talking about that? The name of this panel is clear: thrive or survive. And it's not coincidentally. I'm an engineer by myself, by my first education. I'm technocrat. I believe in technique. I believe in, automation. I believe in intelligent, artificial intelligence. I was brought up with the books of Isaac Asimov. Remember? He was writing about chips inserted in some part of the bodies. Talking about influence of technological development on humanity, we should be objective. Because like anything, any change is influencing the human being. And the human being, by the understanding of psychologists, and possibly Kyra will talk better about that than myself, a person cannot adapt to the rapid changes that fast as the changes are going on. So, the human being, humanity is a little bit backwarded compared to the development of science and technologies. This is first. Second, it was firstly Karl Marx, then it was Keynes, and then it was Galbraith, who were stating differently how the life of the human being will change. Keynes was quoted today as saying in 1931 that our grandkids will work like 3-4 hours per week, using the rest of the time for self-development, cultural and communicational experiences. What we observe now, and he added, people will stop fighting for the survival, the name of our panel. Still now, people are fighting for the survival in great scale. And Galbraith stated that the next step which we reached, New Industrial Society, the name of his fundamental book, will be programming of people's behavior depending on the demand of the modern economy. So why we are talking about the influence of science and technology? We should not follow wishful thinking. We should be objective. For today's model, for Bolognian type of education, ingenious people are not at great demand. Operators are at demand. In the service economy, where the United States of America or Great Britain, they obtain like 70% of the GDP through services, engineers are not that, welcomed. Operators need it, managers. And that is the essence of Bolognian process, if I'm not mistaken. Then, it is very important to understand that we were talking about that during the panels, during different sessions. The existing crisis, this is crisis anthropological, crisis of humanity. Not crisis of politics, not crisis of just economic model. This is anthropological crisis, the crisis of humanity. And if we are living in this type of the crisis, we need to understand that, artificial intelligence, development of the skills, replacement of the organs, kind of modification of the future kids. I would like him to be with blue eyes, ingenious, without any kind of, previous setbacks of the previous generations. Yuval Noah Harari just recently issued a book, Homo Deus. And there he stated what is going on now in his wish to obtain pleasure, to obtain longer life, more comfortable life. Human being is giving up, one feature by the other feature of the human being. And we are heading to the period when biological life could actually be replaced with non-organic life. That is the issue to discuss. And when we are discussing this question about thriving or surviving, to my mind, it is high time for everyone not to, to be carried away with the image that, new science and technology will help a person to live for, 150 or 200 years. But to place the question, what kind of life this particular subject will have? Will we preserve humanity in terms of compassion, solidarity, normal communication? How comes that our kids can be concentrated only during 10 minutes? How comes that they are active in virtual life, but they cannot communicate with each other at all? That is also influence of science and technology. And talking about replacement of the human beings on the working places, it is politically wise to start to think what those people who will not have in the future the normal type of the work, what they are going to do. Who is responsible for that? Society, state, or who? We are not talking about that. Isaac Asimov, long ago, like Thatcher already, to my mind, introduced 3 laws of robototechnic. You know, of course, that. I suppose it is high time not to dream that, some kind of robot will bring a bottle of milk to the elderly person who cannot move, but to think what kind of special arrangements up to the law should be introduced to avoid the fact that organic life is being replaced with non-organic one. Excuse me, maybe I'm sounding a little bit pessimistic, but I suppose there were already a lot of optimism introduced here. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I think so this is the work that we have to do, to lay out these objective bases for the discussion, because the question is indeed, can we thrive? So if we do it well, we will do it very well. And if we don't do it well, we will do it very bad. So there is no in-between. And this is exactly how you say it. And I think then another objective fact, for example, in some countries in the West, I think in Holland, 40% of all the children of 11 years old are short-sighted. They're nearsighted, 40%, because they no longer play outside and they are just in front of their devices. So that means that these children don't feel very well in the open because they don't feel at home in the open, and so they will immediately relate much better to closed spaces. So then we are basically building a kind of a spaceship ourselves, to stay in the in the words of like the aliens. And if we are doing that, we have to be sure that there are still some humans on the bridge of that ship. I think that is what we have to encounter. So then I would like to give the word to you, to Samia and Nkrumah. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, and fascinating discussion, and which actually made me think about my parents' marriage and how that somehow impacted on everything I'm doing. Now I'm a product of a Pan-African marriage. In the late 50s, it was quite an unusual union. But I consider both my parents to be revolutionary in their own ways. Now my father, this Pan-African leader, independence leader, comes from West Africa. And because of his thinking, his consciousness, his Pan-African approach, he makes this incredible decision to marry a woman from North Africa. Completely different culture, different setting, different background. And through his friendship with another North African leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, he decides, yes, they have to look for a suitable Egyptian wife for him. Now, they do that. How do they do that? They search amongst Coptic families in Egypt. They stumble across our mother's family, but the family is terrified. Ghana, this is 57. Where is Ghana? What do they eat, these people? What language do they speak? We have nothing in common with them. We cannot send our daughter there. But so, of course, the leader of Egypt at the time intervenes and says, no, listen, you are talking about the most important African leader, Kwame Nkrumah. We cannot say no to him. At the very least, allow your daughter to visit. And just to visit, so that they don't say we are not being diplomatic, we are not being friendly. And then she can come back. Very low-key visit, nobody hears about it. Now, our mother, too, being the revolutionary character she is, when she read about this man, she said, no, I want to meet this man. He's trying to end poverty and exploitation in Africa. This is the kind of man I want to meet. So the visit is arranged. Mother goes to this faraway Ghana, travels with her uncle. She sees Kwame Nkrumah at the airport, and she says, he was the most attractive, charismatic man I've ever seen. But there was one problem. They didn't speak the same language. Mother went to French school, so she spoke Arabic and French. And our father didn't speak French at the time, and certainly he didn't speak Arabic. So he spoke English. So those two sat together with dictionaries, with interpreters. And at the end of that first evening, they had decided to get married. And they got married. And the marriage worked. This arranged political marriage worked and produced 3 loyal African citizens and citizens of the world. So, and that makes me think, what was that consciousness that bridged space and cultures? Very diverse, religions, everything. What was this kind of consciousness? And when I read our father's book, Conscientism, Philosophy and Ideology for Decolonization. And the main thesis in that book is that in Africa, we are diverse. We have different languages. We have different religions. We have different cultures. We have influences, Christian, Euro-Christian, Islamic, Arab, everything together, including our traditional African religions and cultures. And we need to absorb all of them, digest them, embrace them, and come out with our own African, new African, Pan-African consciousness to unite for our harmonious growth and development. And in 1963, when the Organization of African Unity was created, Kwame Nkrumah stands and talks to delegates and says, we must make the Sahara, do you know that great desert in Africa that divides the north from the rest of Africa? He stands and said, we must make the Sahara Desert bloom with vegetation. We are in the age of science and technology. So it is possible to subdue technology to serve our needs, our very basic human needs. And till today, this Sahara is waiting for us, waiting for the whole world to make it bloom with vegetation. There need not be any hunger in Africa. Under this desert, there are water bodies galore. We have water, we have arable land, we have everything. 60% of the arable land in the whole world is in that strong continent, just waiting for all of us to use technology to develop it. But we import about 60, I just read this morning, about $68 billion of food every year. So we can use that technology to make the Sahara bloom with food, with vegetation, and with flowers. This is how I see this whole discourse for us. We can use it for the whole world. Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. So you're turning us all into arrangers of marriages, basically. And then we have to arrange the marriages between the human and the non-human actors. And that's basically then not so different from how your father met your mother, basically. So we've done this a lot. We've done this all our lives, right? As humans, we've always engaged in these types of new relationships, and we've always had to. So this is not that different in a sense. It just seems a bit more different because of the speed, I think, also that's in the developments. And so maybe Kyra, you would like to take up on that. So our next speaker is Kyra Pobrazenska. Maybe also quickly want to introduce yourself and then.
Thank you very much. I will speak about human. The rapid technological progress creates for us the feeling of human power. We have confidence in technologies, but really, model human is a hard thing in the world. Deprive you of your gadgets. What do you feel? I suppose that you feel confusion. So what will happen tomorrow? Tomorrow, your every action will be transparent. Your every mistake will be noticed. And day after tomorrow, the artificial intelligence will take your job. The technological progress is not malefactor. It just doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about human. Progress has no destination. It's only increase an increase without limits, increase without borders. So this is the first important point. If the process has no goal, it has no predictable trajectory. It's impossible to direct it, to control it. If we can't control everything, this is a zone of risks. Ulrich Beck, in the Society of Risk, noted that development of technologies creates the multiplication of risks. Item risks of modern era have a global character. Small elements of diverse processes are made up in total and management reality. This is a phenomenon of synergy. My dear colleague, in the Rhodes Forum, we talk about very important, very immense processes of geopolitics, of modernity's global risks. But sphere of anthropology is in the heart of modernity's reality. This is human who moves the technical progress. This is human in the center of economic crises, in the center of wars, of the social institutions' erosion. New anthropological research testifies that the elements of modern economic and humanitarian crises create the point of no return in anthropological sphere. Modern processes are one unique anthropological crisis. And the second important point is next. The anthropological factor is unaccounted in the global view of social, economic, and technical future. In elaboration of future strategic, we are working with human at the mechanism of machine. Michel Foucault affirmed that the pressure and the rise of regulation in human's life provoke insanity and renouncement of rational values. Modern human is not rational being. He is migrant between worlds. He is a virtual star in the networks and in real time. He is feeble and powerless thing with archaic pattern of liminality. And you know, we have together a collective of cultural trauma by reasons of world's instability and uncertainty. So the third point of my speech, because of destination's absence in the technological progress, we should talk about the humanitarian security of future. Anthony Giddens noted that risk always needs to be disciplined, but active risk-taking is a core element of a dynamic economy and an innovative society. I think that principal risk of modernity is in displacement of humans' image into the marginal zone. This is not only perspective of transhumanism. Now, we see that the public discourse provokes shifting of notion about biological norm. For example, this is question of gender, the question of transformation of human body, of bioethics. But we must understand that changes in biological components of nature is an issue of evolutionary changes. Today, we face the process when the humanity enters the phase of unnatural or artificial selection. Moving naturally, the evolution is directed at the optimum of the whole. Other transformation vectors are evolutionary dead ends or mutations. I think that modern humanity is in a phase of uncontrollable experiment. Maybe you know an author of this project. No author, no responsibility. Why no? So this is a last point of my speech. We have to articulate the strategies of future inclusive new knowledge about human. The discussion provoke development of critical thinking. It's very dangerous to be innocent in the modern world. Thank you.
Well, I think two quick things. So one, although we're all speaking English, English is a very pragmatic language and it makes everything seem very simple. That's really a problem of this language. So it's very good to hear your philosophy coming from the Russian philosophy, coming through this, because this is what we need. I think the fact of the language itself has created this kind of quick fix thinking. So, of course, I'm not saying we should go back to Hegel German or to some kind of, but we need more granularity in this debate. And that's exactly what you're doing. And I think if we have an author, it could be Tarkovsky and Stalker, that could maybe be the author of this zone here that we are talking about. That was actually the first book that Siarkunen referred me to when I spoke of Internet of Things, I think 6-7 years ago. And he immediately pointed me to Stalker and Tarkovsky and said, this is the zone in which we are operating. So I would like to ask Fabio if you would like to sort of also give your thoughts, maybe also hearing all the panel. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I have to say that when I first heard Sophie's terrific presentation, I was literally blown away. You know, I start thinking, wow, this is a future that, you know, might not really look like as it will be, but definitely it's a word that poses a lot of questions and challenges. And one part of me, I must confess, this is a dystopia. This is something I don't want. This is something we should resist. And then I said, well, Fabio, you can't end up, you know, playing the role of the old conservative, you know, who is able to use his mobile phone. No, this is not the correct approach. And then I had this thing, you know, because I've been looking at this discussion around dialogue of civilization for very long. One of the starting points for me when in 1998, Mohammed Khatami, then the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, made the first trip to a Western country, it was Italy, in 1998, 20 years ago, and gave this amazing speech at the European University Institute on dialogue of civilization. And of course, he made this call, you know, he's a theologian, he's trained in Islamic as well as Western philosophy. And his call was, we need this dialogue because there is the risk that we politically will clash. But then he was saying something that I didn't understand how prophetic was. He was saying, we need this dialogue of civilization also because some of the challenges between man and nature, science and ethics, human beings, society, families that we are facing are so big that I think we'll need to draw on all the great resources of ethical creation of the great worldwide civilization. And that's where my thinking goes. You know, Simone Weil, the Jewish thinker from France, at the beginning of the 20th century, said, talking about the great achievement of the Western civilization, and then said, there is something in the Western self-drive that is risking to devour us. the East will save us. The Eastern, non-Western spirituality tradition maybe will save us. You know, now this is what I'm thinking, and I'm thinking because I think one thing we need to be very careful, and that I feel a little bit uncomfortable about some of this artificial intelligence and kind of discussion, is the belief that we are entering, and you mentioned, Ross, at the beginning, this transhumanist new era. I think this is a problem that replicates this idea that progress development happens always against traditions. Tradition is the opposite, is the obstacle that need to overcome. I think that's completely wrong. Traditions are the horizons within which, and I'm talking cultural, religious, civilizational tradition, are the homes of the human beings. We cannot be human outside of these traditions. And if we think that there is a way that calls for humanity outside of this tradition, we are preparing for dehumanization. This is the history of the human being. In the 20th century, we had cases. And we need, of course, to be very careful. We need to cultivate. And so my point really is this. I think as the progress of science and technology accelerate, and we need to some way not reject, but embrace with an extra effort in revitalizing the best of the great cultural, worldwide, religious, cultural, philosophical tradition. It's almost that we need it, and we need it to do it together. Otherwise, I think we risk to end up in this world of dehumanization. And you know, the dialogue of civilization for me is this call for this new humanism. I don't want a transhumanism, I want a new humanism. This the new global solidarities of which Fred Dallmeyer has always talked in his books. And for me, therefore, we need to always remind that the great experts, since we're talking about science, but again, great experts of humanities are the great classics, are the great philosophers, religious leaders, great cultural leaders. These are the, why? Because ultimately they always, there is no way of asking the essential question, which is, how can you have a happy life? What is a good life? And I think if we start, my fear is that we always need to embed this sort of discussion, also reminding ourselves that we need to ask, what is it good for us living a meaningful, happy, and good life? And to answer this, we need to go back to the only way in which we can answer this question, which is the way in which generation and generations of human beings embedded in great worldwide religious, civilizational, cultural, philosophical traditions have tried to answer this. This is a call not for rejection, but a call for a dialogue with science, rationality, and to use the word of fides et ratio, and wisdom and spirit and religion, because otherwise we risk this future of dystopia that for a second glimpsed in my eyes when you were describing our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick organizational issue. Sophie, you need to catch a plane. Do you have 10 minutes? Okay, so then quickly. So I think we have a quick roadmap, I would say. So we need an objective basis on which we can have discussions. So we need a data layer. We need this objectivity. We need it lined out. We need the seriousness of that situation, and we need to see how serious that is. Then we need diversity. So it has to be on top of this. We have to have all the actors coming in. These actors can also be non-human actors. So in a sense, we're not doing that much different from having a tree in the village, being part of the community, being a wise tree, or being there. So we have been there talking to these non-human actors. It's not as if they are totally new because they're made out of steel somehow. So there is a techno-animism here, and so we've done that. And then we have to take it to the level of consciousness, because that's where all this intelligence actually becomes integrated into being. And then we all need to go home somewhere, because that's where the home is where the tradition is. And then come the boundaries of liminality that we then have to face, because these are the marks of the moments of where we are either Heim or not Heim. And it's clear that it's the old Freudian notion of unheimlich, that's unheimliche, that's what we're facing now. And the beautiful thing was that for Freud, that was not something strange. It was actually the familiar. It was the familiar coming back to you in a different sense. And this is sort of what we're facing. So we see the matrix, we glimpse the Borg, sort of we see this, but this is not a set course. It's not a given. We have some space for agency, and that's what we're debating. That's what we're debating here. And I think we also have a roadmap. And I think the forum is taking the lead in these discussions, and it's very important, because everywhere I go in the world, it's either a technical discussion. We go to the world. I go to the World IoT Expo, or I go somewhere, and there's everybody talking about 5G and blockchain and the things. Okay, that's good and important. And then on the governance level, everybody's talking about governance in the old ideologies, sort of they're not really taking all of this in. The early attempts of creating a framework for this space that we see in Singapore, Malaysia, also Saudi Arabia and China, are very important to map, but they are also first steps. They're also not givens. They're full flow. They're, as we heard also today from Dejang Yi, they're in flux. They're fluid. It's not a system that is given. So I think we're all in the same boat here. And I want to thank you all for pointing that out, but also pointing out that we have agency. It's not as if we are helpless here. So I would like to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions, yes, please. Then can somebody come with a microphone? And yes, sir, you are the first. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Claude Begley from the Swiss Federal Parliament. It seems to me obvious that the progress of the technology will lead to a cooperation between we, organic beings,
Speak in the microphone, please.
And the complement of artificial intelligence. But we need a sense of purpose. We need a North Star, and I liked very much that idea that the traditions are the horizon. The questions. How can we introduce ethical sense in the algorithm? How can we complement the quest for the efficiency which comes from digitalization with moral values? How can we combine instinctive trust with objective analysis of data as provided by, for example, eBay? And especially, how can we reconcile the moral order of the Western society with what is starting, for example, in China? How can we try to find a win-win between our system, which is individual freedom up to the limit of the state of law, and there is a barrier not to be passed, but until we do whatever we want, or to have more general goals and a constant check of our behavior. In China now, either through internet or facial recognition, you get good points, bad points, and it's like the karma in India. And at some point, if you have too many bad points, you want to borrow money at the bank, the rate would be higher. So there would be automatic plus and minuses in the quality of your life depending on how you live. So between the two, how can we try to find a win-win solution?
I think maybe Sophie, you want to take this also a little bit? Because I think the first question was very much about the ethics and the AI and sort of how can we manage a kind of...
Sure. That's probably one of the biggest questions in the tech space at the moment is, well, there's a couple of elements to it. One is how do you eliminate bias and how do you eliminate particularly the bias of the people who are programming the algorithms, because they tend to be quite a small subset of people from a small part of the world, Silicon Valley, who all tend to look quite similar and sound quite similar and want quite similar things. And clearly that's not representative of the whole world. But there is a lot of money and thought being put into the ethical side of that. The biggest question, of course, which is one for the philosophers and anthropologists on the panel, not for me, is whose ethics? Ethics vary by culture, they vary by religion, they vary by a whole bunch of things. One of the biggest questions for this is autonomous vehicles. How do we program the so-called trolley problem, who to kill in an accident? That question has bothered philosophers for 100 years or so. It's unlikely we'll solve that in the next 20 years, but we'll have to program the machines to do something. And there's a question as to how and who decides what the ethics of the machines are going to be. There's also the moral hazard that goes with the fact that even if the technologies are even slightly better or slightly safer or slightly more efficient than today, then we're morally obligated to use them if they'll kill less people on the road or whatever else, irrespective of the fact that we might not have nailed down the ethics by then. I mean, in the tech world, a few years ago, we didn't talk about bias. We talked about ethics to a degree, but the volume on that has gone up intensely over the last couple of years. It's really the big question. And the problem is that we haven't trained enough ethicists and philosophers. In the sort of the last 40 years, we've massively underfunded the humanities. And now every tech company needs an ethics committee. Every government wants a group of philosophers to get round every now and again and talk about the meaning of life. There simply aren't enough to go round. And that's a massive challenge too. And talk about the future of jobs, are there new categories that we'll need? We're going to need a bunch more ethicists. Particularly, of course, as we create new biotechnologies that themselves come with a whole range of life extension, or we talked about augmenting children. All these things are massive questions that we need to ask. Anyway, I'm going to stop there.
Maybe, Mr. Jaakkonen, you want to take this question also? Because, I mean, you have experience with large organizations, like huge organizations and scale.
I guess, your question could be the substance of the discussion of this panel. And, I completely agree with Sophie. It is very difficult to give a just, bland answer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because it would be exactly simplification of the human nature. But on the other hand, I suppose maybe we are at the age of some special arrangements if the mankind is wise enough to have it. Why in the past we were able, human beings, mankind, we were able to sign a treaty to prohibit, nuclear weapons, further developed, Non-Proliferation Treaty. Why we were wise enough to prohibit chemical weapon. In a way, though it is much more complicated, what we are discussing now, that the development of technology does not matter, artificial intelligence or some kind of new, weaponry of mass destruction can distract mankind. And the consciousness of this risk, as Kyra noted, should drive not this forum, but the entire mankind to understand the necessity of dialogue and collaboration, to, evaluate some norms to be, controlled, that something will not go wrong. This is the only way I can explain it now. Thank you.
I think it also... maybe it also, Samia, sort of what you've been saying about, yes, okay, so a big applause for Sophie, who has to catch a plane. Thank you very much. Have safe flights. And so Samia, you've been, basically what I'm thinking about also, what your parents did was like bridging a sense of purpose with a sense of risk, because that was, and so this is like the counselor. So we need counselors here. So how would you sort of answer this question about the ethics and how to bring it into the discussions also now on Africa and also on investments in Africa and decisions on where to go, which trajectory to take?
Yes, good question and difficult one, of course. But thank God we are human. Thank God we have a mission or a purpose, many of us. And I think almost many of us, but certainly many Africans remember or can sing by heart Bob Marley's Redemption Song. I don't know if you know, I remember when I was younger, I could sing it all by heart, yes. But the line that sticks in my mind is, liberate yourselves from mental slavery. And of course, he's talking about a specific situation and a particular people. But actually, the call in that message is that we must liberate ourselves from anything that is negative and unproductive, and that we do have the power. We have the power, if we will, if we want to use it in the right way, to bring about positive change, or at least contribute to bringing about positive change. And I want to be part of that generation that is making a contribution to bringing about positive change for my people and the world. You know, it's our choice. I want to liberate myself from mental slavery, even if it's slavery to technology. I want to be a little bit in control. At least I want to go from this material existence having said that, yes, I played my part, you know. I was part of this group of people or that generation that made a contribution to peace, to development, to harmony. Yes, that makes me happy. And ethics is an integral part of that peaceful and harmonious development. We care about each other. We love each other. You know, it's love that makes, that passion and love that makes us sacrifice, that makes us, you know, just put sometimes the needs of others or the collective, the big needs of others, sometimes a little bit ahead of our own, you know. And that is very much rooted in my tradition, you know, in my culture. You know, we have these humanist African traditional principles, collectivism, you know, just yes, thinking of others as you think of yourself. I don't want to see anyone left behind. And as I said, I'm very grateful to have a mission in life to make that contribution. And the struggle is beautiful, I can assure you. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much. I don't think we can end on a better note, actually. So I would like to end here, I think, because are there any more really pressing questions? Because, I mean, how can we end better than this? I mean, we bring in Africa as the counselor of the world in times when we need the dialogue with non-human actors. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I think it was a very good panel. And I want a big applause for my guests, please. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We will be holding the closing ceremony this evening from 8 p.m. in the Superdome. We hope to see you all there. Can I just make a brief announcement about translation devices? It appears that one or two of you may have taken them with you yesterday, perhaps back to your hotel rooms. If you do have a translation device in your possession, please can you bring it back? You can hand it to any member of dock staff and it will get to where it needs to go. Thank you very much.
My dear Maria, I'm here to see you. Won't you please, please open the door? I brought you flowers, been waiting hours, can't stand it anymore. So here's what happened when you were napping.